Hello everybody and welcome back to You Can't Win. This is Tom here and I'm joined by Don as usual. Today we're going to talk about, I don't know, it's not the most comfortable subject, but we were sort of thinking about like genocide denial. I don't know, it just seems a little bit too common, especially with like online with like politics people. You know, the word genocide is like a highly charged thing and it's kind of like a legalistic term that people can get bogged down a bit in the definitions of that. So it's not really that we're interested in talking about. You can call various things genocides, atrocities, whatever you want to say, but it's more the problem that people seem to run into when something of like great magnitude happens that is like a disruptive event in terms of a political narrative, and how people seem to respond in a really defensive way to maintain that narrative instead of trying to come to terms with the fact that this happened. So yeah, this just seems to be something that happens. It's more prevalent online than I think it should be with people who don't, I wouldn't say they have like ill intent, you know, so I don't know, it just seems something that might be worth discussing. And we're not trying to, you know, analyze any specific situation and dig into that. I don't think either of us feel qualified to do so. So this isn't really one of those kind of things, but just like an analysis of like, why do people end up talking about this kind of stuff in the way that they do, you know? So I'm specifically thinking of things like whatever's going on with the Uyghurs in China, the various events that have occurred in Syria, the kind of brutalities that have occurred on all sides there. Yemen, Yugoslavia in the 90s is something that seems to come up. I don't know. What are some of your favorite genocides, Don?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the genocide word tends to get loaded, and it's hard to, because the main thing is that like in international law and stuff like that, it compels to action.
Sure, and, that's true.
That's sort of the difference where people really want to try to minimize the like ability. Either want to, you know, if they want action of some sorts, then they'll try to invoke the word, and if they don't, I don't even know if it applies in terms of like you get like this inflation both ways kind of thing where people start using the word genocide and then they think it means like physical elimination of everyone in an area or something like that kind of thing, you know, like just a widespread. You know, it's the equivalent of the Holocaust, as if that, which is more like the pinnacle of that kind of outcome. Like there's all sorts of kind of lesser things, but yeah, to me it's more the issue of getting into like a defense lawyer posture, you know, people trying to work through every single possible claim against someone that you might support, and then turning that into your sort of political views or something like that. So, and you know, it is funny because people make fun of Orwell a lot now, but he does really see that very clearly, that kind of like, you know, that intention or psychological sort of feature where people try to look at two contradictory parts of ideology and sort of merge them together in different ways. And it's not really like, it can get sinister. Most of the time it's just very lazy thinking, and it happens all over the place.
Yeah.
It's not even like especially within parts of the left that I'm concerned with. It's more that those are people that I already like and trust most of the time, you know? So I trust them about a lot of other things. And then when they start talking about certain things, they just go off onto the deep end kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's just true with a lot of the way that it's structured ideologically, a lot of this kind of stuff, like any sort of hot topic that comes up. I always think of like Cuba or something like that, where, you know, people will say about Cuba, it's amazing how great their economy is and stuff, and it's very egalitarian and all this stuff. And then very, very quickly after that, they'll go, you know, the sanctions have destroyed the economy, and, you know, like the embargo of the United States like has kept it, you know, poor and stuff. And
right, and then when the embargo gets when they pull the embargo off, or they're like saying to do so, then that becomes like, oh, this is the CIA trying to destroy the economy with privatized, you know, market capital, like, or whatever. It's like, which way do you want it?
Yeah, I feel like with any kind of debate online and stuff, you have to, or not online, I always say online, but like you have to care about a lot more than just the case involved kind of thing. You kind of have to have a lot of like principles and I don't know, like just you have to care about more than just winning that side. I think that like the example that we kind of maybe knew a lot or kind of equivalent on the different Rizona and stuff was like Grover Fur or stuff like that, where
Yeah.
he tries to look at Stalin and just debunk every single negative thing about him or something like that. He tries to figure out some way of exculpate him or whatever. And the thing that is the most shocking really to me online is that now that is a very common kind of thing. Like there's hundreds of people that try to do similar stuff online now, and
Yeah.
that's very bizarre to me. Like it's like it was something that was quaint
Mm-hmm.
when it was just a few people doing that, and it was like years after the Cold War ended and stuff. So it's not even like, you know, it's not vital in any way. It's just it's more like a silly affectation or something. But
Right.
now it's more like a current again, and that's very weird.
Yeah, and it weirdly mirrors some of the kind of way that people talk, like just kind of like various dramas of cancel culture or whatever that goes on. Like it's a weird sort of, I don't know, there's a lot of similarities there that are very strange, or like parallels perhaps. Like you said, it gets into this like legalistic kind of a thing where it's like defense lawyers arguing specific, like, did this a violation occur? Does it fit this definition? And it's very abstract and detached from like the real import of the situation. And I think that's kind of what drew me to want to talk about this, is that lost in all these discussions is any sense of like what's the actual problem. Like, what people are more concerned with winning an argument so that a certain kind of grand narrative can stand, rather than whatever horrible thing is happening. Like that doesn't seem to matter. It's there's like this disconnect there where the horrible event is an opportunity to win points rather than yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm making my point very clear, but
No, I get what you mean. I think that one thing that made this clear to me in the past was sort of the discussions around Ukraine and the famine in under Stalin. You know, when I was reading about it the first time and like learning more about it, you know, the question is for like Ukrainian nationalists, a lot of them, they believe that the famine was deliberate and a genocide famine that was determined to wipe out the kind of the nation or something like that kind of thing, right? They were like, well, if he kills off millions of people, then he kind of smashes the ability of Ukraine to be independent in different ways and stuff like that, which I don't think really makes much sense, you know, as like a thing. Like it just,
yeah,
I don't think that was what happened, but I think it was more catastrophic collectivization policy, you know, and that, you know, maybe there was some sort of deliberate, you know, like it's not like it wasn't deliberate in the way that like it was like an engineered famine, but it was a huge policy mistake kind of thing, right? But
yeah, I think there was
with,
like deliberate decisions made that were extremely callous and and specifically disproportionately affected Ukrainians.
But it's interesting that the way that the ideology works for sort of some Marxist-Leninists and stuff is that they will use that sort of proof that it wasn't what the nationalists say, like wasn't what the far right says, or like, you know, the more nationalist Ukrainians. Therefore, it's somehow immunized in their logic that now, because it's somehow policy, that's somehow not really political, you know? It's like somehow now, because it was just a catastrophic mistake, it doesn't somehow infringe on the ideology itself.
Right.
And then that sort of thing where you depoliticize it by making it a technical choice, that is one of the most political things you can do, obviously, right? Like it's like
yeah,
it's like a very, very it's a strategy, because if the system can allow something like that to happen, that's an indictment of the system itself. I mean, it is. It's just like, you know, you might still want to be a Marxist after that, because, which a lot of people did, but like you know, it's this very strange thing where like there's the ideas of what good policy are, kind of thing, like what people should be doing at any given time. And then there's sort of this cultural overlay of people being certain trends in society, like being a Bolshevik or being, you know, a liberal or whatever, that have like this cultural continuity over time. And a lot of what people do in terms of identity is try to defend the cultural continuity instead of the policy.
Yeah.
So it's not really, it becomes more about like the red flag and things like that than it does about the actual, it's stuff like, you know, maybe the invasion of Afghanistan by USSR or something like that.
Right, or Hungary.
You end up worried about this sort of grand historical narrative instead of like, you know, what are the facts that you want to negotiate with, kind of thing. So,
yeah.
You know.
And I think the narrative can be so grand that, oh, what's a few million lives among friends kind of a thing, you know, like it's just a minor little thing. Like if we can just find a way to like hand wave this away, it's more trouble than it's worth to actually like scrutinize this as some kind of like problem and instead just deal with it in this, you know, these terms that you're discussing where it doesn't threaten the narrative itself, because that's the real, you know, that's what actually matters. So, you know, these wars and these atrocities don't matter as much as, you know, the maintenance of this narrative and to make sure that ultimately that wins out in the end, you know. And to me, it's like if you are committed to a narrative, a political ideology or whatever, there should be like a reason for that beyond this kind of weird circular thing where, you know, our side has to win so that our side can win, sort of a thing. Like that doesn't, you know, why should your side win? Like you should be invested in your side for a reason. And if something happens where people that you identify as, you know, being on your side or something have done something which is atrocious, you have to reckon with that in terms of, well, how does this reflect on the movement or whatever that I identify with? Like, does this reflect in some way on the ideology that I've adopted, or does it not? Or is that, you know, does it mean I have to abandon this, or does it mean I have to adjust things or not? And I don't think in every case that it does mean that, right? Like it could be that, like if you're a Marxist and you're looking at like what Stalin did in the Ukraine or in Hungary or whatever, you don't necessarily need to say that, well, this means Marxism is wrong, communism is a fake thing or whatever, and instead capitalism is the way to go. You don't need to necessarily do that, but it seems like that's what people feel like is at stake, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it doesn't seem like necessary to have everything conjoined in a way where it's like all or nothing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, again, that's what happens when you zoom out too far and you just have this like almost cosmological kind of narrative, you know?
Yeah, and I think that it gets especially toxic when you start to combine sort of the narrative with particular people in different ways. Like you kind of defend one state or one leader or something like that. It just ends up becoming very bizarre strategy that is like, okay, well, you're trying to exonerate that particular person from any sort of negative thing, or in the related issue of using the far right position, or like, you know, a sort of quasi-fascist liberal or something, that position as the baseline that you're arguing against, and then any sort of left-wing critique of the same things, the strategy is that well, you're just serving that other line or something like that, right?
Crypto-fascist and all that.
Yeah. So there's no actual debate about the good and bad. It's like, okay, well, we can have that debate another day. Right now, all we have to do is worry about like not serving the interests of some greater evil or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, that ends up being a weird way, but it's almost like a strategy again of like just trying to avoid truth in different ways, like just trying to avoid digging into it so that you don't have to complicate your worldview or something like that. And which is the thing that, you know, we mentioned this before, but like it's almost like this weird like phase that you go through in development or something like that, like where this is not something I think that you have to get stuck in like for your whole life or whatever, right? Like it's like it's just it's like a certain phase of argumentation or something where you can get sort of frozen doing this particular rhetorical move out of certain like ideas of loyalty and sort of simplistic arguments or something like that. But I don't know. I feel like because it's something that I've like worked through myself
Yeah.
And it took a long time.
Me too.
But
yeah.
like, I think you can get out of it. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think people move through this stuff really fast nowadays. I think it's really easy to find like ideological material to read online, and people to talk to who will just serve up the talking points and the, just like the basic material you need to kind of like, okay, this is what I should believe now, the dogma, I guess.
Yeah.
And when you're kind of fresh into something, you sort of are, and I don't even think this is a problem, but this is just kind of how this stuff works. Whenever you're sort of newly subscribing to certain ideas and beliefs, there's a certain process of, someone once described it as like brainwashing yourself. Like you're accepting that, okay, I was wrong about things before. This makes sense on a fundamental level. I'm willing to accept that this is the actual truth about things. You haven't figured out the nuances in everything yet, but you're sort of like in a, Foucault talked about like the docility of learning and stuff, where you're like allowing yourself to be imprinted upon, so you're willing to accept that I was wrong about things, and then stuff that doesn't sit right, doesn't sound right, it sounds kind of like abrasive to just like a basic kind of moral concern, you're willing to be like, well, maybe this is just kind of part of this new thing or whatever, and I think that's where you find a lot of people, because it's all happening so fast, they kind of land in this position, and there's enough other people now that it kind of builds up this weird critical mass where there's like huge numbers of people who are all in this, like, they're just willing to kind of brainwash each other, like they just repeat all the same things, and it just becomes like a, an echo chamber, I guess. So that seems different than what it used to be, like when we were sort of going through this phase and exploring these different ideas and stuff. I think it was much more like of a niche, like weirdo nerd kind of a thing. And it took a lot more time. You had to like really dig to find stuff that was like interesting. Like you mentioned Grover Fur, nowadays it's fairly easy to find those ideas and to kind of be exposed to them and figure out like, okay, what am I, if this is what I want to get into, like what am I supposed to believe about certain things and stuff. When we were doing this, like 10 years ago or something, you had to go like download a PDF from some FTP or something. You had to like read a book, it wasn't just like, well, just follow this guy on Twitter and he'll just kind of be saying this stuff all day. And it gave you a little bit more, I don't know, you could throttle that whole process a little bit more, and you also weren't surrounded by people who were reinforcing it and affirming it, like everything. Sure. Because there reaches a point where it's not really the like incisiveness of an idea, or the way that it aptly critiques something doesn't become the reason that you get attached to it. Instead, it's just like, how much does this idea, like almost in an aesthetic way, reflect the principles or the belief system? It's just like, how Stalinist is this, or how like radical or is this, or whatever, and that becomes the principle, or like the value that things adopt. It's not so much about like, oh, this is a unique and like interesting way to look at this, I haven't thought about it this way, and then ultimately at the end of that you can say like, well, there's some merit to this, I can kind of see where the side is coming from, and then go from there. Like maybe you take their side, maybe you don't, but you have enough time to process it. And nowadays it's just like there's like this weird race to be the most X that you can be, whatever it is.
Yeah, that made me think of around like 2007, 2008 or something like that, when I would go to the Maoist Internationalist Movement's archive online or something like that and just download a bunch of old issues of their notes or something like that from like the 80s or something.
Right.
And print them off. And I just had this big stack of them, and I would like go to a restaurant or something, like just get breakfast and just be reading through this stack of like Maoist literature or something like that. And I think that the difference is like, that's obviously a much slower private process than just tweeting or something like that, but like the difference is that like it quickly sort of translates into, okay, and then you go to certain meetings or something like that, with some people, maybe because you see online that there's like a meeting for that or something. That used to be the way that people, you wouldn't, that's how you would learn more about different movements is just by going to the different meetings and stuff, right? And the difference is that, like, I think that if you're in person with people, there are things that you've read about and stuff. I think that for a lot of people, at least, there's a revulsion that can happen pretty quickly where you're like, wait a minute, this just isn't, these people don't know what they're talking about or something like that, like after.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen to everyone, obviously, like a lot of group dynamics can sucker people in and stuff. But like, I think that there is something a bit different than having some people like coordinating like 90% of this online and then the rest of it like with small groups of friends that they're highly dedicated with. That's a lot different than just like random people you meet kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
like in more mainstream kind of politics. So yeah.
I think all these dynamics sort of lend themselves to like the worst aspect of all this stuff, like a kind of cultishness where it's very simplified kind of dogma where it's like, these are bad guys, these are good guys, the good guys do no wrong, the bad guys are behind everything wrong in the world, and everything that happens, it's a matter of divining the way that the bad guys are responsible and the good guys need your help,
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, is that how anything works in the world? Like, you know what I mean? Like, usually things are a little bit more complicated than some like little superhero story like that. But that seems to be the way that people process political events and stuff, especially when it's like a foreign thing, like it's happening in some other country where you don't really know what it's like there, you don't really have a real connection to it. So it all kind of happens in this imagined version of that country or that place. And you can kind of just play out this, it's like your own little Marvel movie of the superheroes and the supervillains. And I don't know, it's like this kind of sick form of entertainment, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I want to be able to support the idea of like people independently kind of educating themselves about this kind of thing, like just learning the way we did about different political ideas and alternate ways of viewing things, of like viewing historical events or looking at ways of organizing society and kind of finding all that stuff out on their own. But it seems like the well has become really poisoned lately, so it seems more treacherous. I don't know if it's necessarily still like, I don't want to say like don't do it because you're just going to become like some kind of cultish weirdo or something, but it seems like you have to be much more aware of what you're doing and who you're talking to, because people are very willing to kind of just pull you into something. It's too easy now,
Yeah. And I don't think that, again, I am very interested in people. I'm focused on people that I otherwise already agree with on a lot of things and feel like maybe in an ideal world, their heart would be in a better place or something like that kind of thing. It's not, for me, that's the kind of thing that I focus on, but it's true with all sorts of different ideologies. I mean, it's like, you got like QAnon and stuff, and so many people
Russiagate and all.
Russiagate, yeah. Just lots of people that it's interesting. It's just, I think it's like a strategy. It's not a strategy, but it's like a thing that happens. I do think it is something to do with the internet, with like rapid filtering of information or something, where you're sorting all of these different opinions really, really quickly. And I think there's like a good example of this is there'll be like a headline that pops up,
mm-hmm.
and the important thing for people is how they respond to the headline.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like the issue is in the headline will be something like, if it says something obvious, it'll be like, we didn't need a study to know this or something like that, kind of thing. Or like if it says something that implies something slightly off or something like that, then it gets insulted or something like that. And it's interesting because it's like a perfunctory, automatic ideology kind of thing that like you see a headline and you know how hundreds of people are going to respond to it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very like haunting or something like that, like just seeing hundreds of people see the same headline, respond the same way, knowing that other people are responding the same way too,
Yeah, with
like
it's no connection to the actual whatever the article is written about. That's not relevant. It's just the headline, and it just becomes this network of
Yeah.
headlines and responses to these headlines, and then kind of people sort themselves out according to how they respond to this. Like, it's this weird like puppet show, you know?
Yeah. And I do think it's something to do with the rapidity of it all that that encourages that kind of thing, and the sort of flippant nature of Twitter and the flippant nature of Facebook and stuff, where you're driven to just get the instant response and stuff like that. I don't know. It's very strange.
Yeah, like if you look at, like, you know, when the Pepe alt-right sort of thing was popping off and becoming popular, I guess like 2016 or whatever, that I think is like a really obvious way to see this. You know, it's an obvious example of this because it was highly motivated by like racism and whatnot. So people would have all this stuff to say about like immigrants in Europe, and, you know, especially like Sweden. I remember that was like a big thing, like, oh, Sweden's turning into like this, like just pure like rape zone kind of a thing. Like you can't go outside, you know, and that was like this congealing thing. So you could obviously tell that everyone was essentially responding in bad faith to stuff. It was very easy to know how people would respond to a headline, because it's just like, well, what would a racist think about this? Like, does it say something positive about a non-white group of people? Well, then they're going to say, oh, well, this is like Zog propaganda or whatever. Does it say something that implies something negative about a non-white group of people? Oh, well, then they're going to say like, see, look, proof, this is evidence that we're right, you know? But now that's like all political ideologies seem to kind of work that way. Like people have sorted themselves out into like how they're supposed to respond. And then there's this like tension on the border areas where people are like, oh, well, this person didn't respond to the headline the way the rest of us are, so they're actually in that other camp. And it's really dumb. I don't know, like it's just really stupid. Like it doesn't accomplish anything. It's all like, if we look at the fact that the alt-right folks were probably motivated by like these emotional kind of things, like, right, like people are racist because they are hateful for whatever reason. They're scared, you know, the whole economic anxiety. I don't know why people are racist, but it doesn't seem like it's a rational thing, you know. I think that's probably true with all of this stuff. Like Russiagate people, that definitely seems like an anxiety about like things are getting weird. I don't understand what's happening. I wish things would just go back to normal and people, the smart people, would go back in charge, you know, that kind of a thing. With everything else, I don't know. I haven't like suss that apart. It just seems like those two are the obvious ones. It's very easy to tell what's going on. I assume it's essentially the same thing happening with all the other little groups and stuff and networks of people, but it just doesn't seem like a healthy thing, or like for the people involved and for people who have to deal with the fact that this is what political discourse is like online. Like, I don't know how important that actually is, but it's probably a negative thing regardless. Like, it just seems like, okay, so if this is how people interact online, this is what their idea of like discourse is, then any sort of serious discourse, you end up having to spend a lot of time like rehabilitating people and like, well, this is actually a really stupid way to respond and think about things. Instead, you should be more critical and blah, 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 blah. Instead of people just having that sense of, okay, well, I want to learn about something, so I will be attentive and studious and serious about this, and when something kind of disrupts my idea about it, that's an interesting thing. That's an opportunity to learn, instead of like taking this defensive approach of like, oh no, this is some kind of lie planted by the bad guys and I need to regroup with all the good guys and make sure we all respond appropriately. You know, that's not a good, I don't know, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I find that with religious stuff too. It's for sure. You know, we've been talking about like maybe more left-right kind of stuff, but there, you know, it's very common for people to try to do like a party line thing for religion, and it's not just a matter of like crimes and all that kind of stuff. It's also about like, it turns into another like flag in bio kind of thing, you know, and where people expect you to respond to certain things in a certain way, expect you to like signal that kind of stuff, and I don't know, that feels ominous to me sometimes. So
yeah, I agree. I think it's funny, the flag in the bio is like, that's such a perfect symbol of the mentality. It's like, these are my flags, these are my teams that I root for. But yeah, you're right with the religious thing. That's 100% true. Like, I've come across this mentality with with Muslims, like if they're Sunni, they want to kind of act like Sunnis have always been correct about everything, like they're this unified group of people from the beginning of Islam, and that there's always been these different groups who have, like, they're morally like pernicious and they're trying to like overtly undermine things. It's almost like they're these little like devilish groups or whatever, and it's not just, and the idea that like Sunnis have always been like unified and like it's just a single monolithic thing. Everyone has always believed the same set of beliefs. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not true.
Yeah.
You go from place to place. It differs. Understandings across time change. The way people interpret it in terms of practice also change. And that doesn't mean that we can't claim like a consistency of like a sort of a lineage there, and like identify like, yeah, this is kind of like the sect, or this is like the understanding that I subscribe to, and I kind of like uphold these people as my predecessors or whatever, and my, like, these are people that I would learn from, kind of a thing. But you have to just reckon with like what historical evidence shows you, which is just that it's not, people have debated about things and it's not just as clear as like, well, here are the answers, and now your job is to just stick to the answers because everyone's going to try to tell you differently,
Mm-hmm.
I saw some tweet the other day that was talking about, I think it was some sort of criticism of a kind of Marxist who like reads Karl Marx as not as like a way of a criticism, not as like a critical text, but as like this kind of scripture where you read current events and like all the things that happen in the world into like you divine the meaning of the world in the text of Marx,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a bad way to do anything, even like with a religious scripture, to be honest. Like, I don't think that's a good way to make sense of the world as it's happening around you.
Sure.
It can be a guide in like a moral sense, and it can be like reminders of ultimate principles and things like that. I think that's what the intention is there. But you very quickly end up in weird places where it's like, oh, well, Russia is Gog and China is Magog, and the Iron Wall and blah blah blah. You kind of get into weird sort of territory where the world's going to end in 20 years and it's happening on June 21 or what, that kind of thing.
Yeah, someone asked us to do an episode on apocalypse, and maybe one day we should do that.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, like thinking about end times and how that affects religious views and stuff. But yeah, I mean, with a lot of any sort of ideology that's complex enough, there's always like any given situation can always be filtered to allow, one decision or the other to be just equally valid, kind of thing, right? Like, it's more like a judgment of the individual in the situation that actually has to make it. Like, we were talking about this the other day with like Lenin and stuff, where a lot of Marxists can, they can look at a particular situation, and there's like a complete set of ideas and texts and everything that can inform either opinion on something, right? Like say, just as a random example, like Scottish independence or something like that, like independence of a small nation. There's communist parties in Britain that are pro-independence. There's communist parties that are against it, and like lots of different left people on either side and all that kind of stuff, right? And, you can look it up. You can go, okay, well, Lenin thought that like small nations should be independent because it's a progressive attack against conglomerations of capital, and it preserves a culture against capitalist invasion or whatever into just dominating all aspects of your life and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like, you can find the same kind of texts that are like, oh, well, Marx thought that like creation of a world market was a progressive thing, and that, you don't want to side with your national bourgeoisie and all this stuff, and that's not necessarily progressive because at the end of the day, they'll always side with world capital, and you don't want to be stagist because, like, you can kind of go through the argument, and there's prefab solutions for any given outcome.
Right.
And it's much more a judgment about like what you think is the best outcome. And then the way that these arguments end up working is people say the prefab argument but it's like almost like the emotional affect is the important part. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, no. I just happen to think that this prefab argument fits in this situation because that's just my investment in this. And then if someone makes the counter argument, which is already basically from the same catalog, they're like, well, no, I'm not. You're just being dumb because you're taking the other side, and we've all agreed to be on this side already. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a weird kind of Mean Girls thing of,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what happens is people think that something is true because Lenin said it, or put in whoever, right? Depending on your ideology, if we're talking politics or religion or whatever. Even something like with Islam, like if the Prophet says something, that's not necessarily like an argument that that's the right interpretation of what is being said. You can do the same thing with like any kind of hadith or whatever. You can interpret it a multitude of different ways. Just pointing to like something that there's this hadith and this scholar said so therefore if you disagree, you're disagreeing with the Prophet and that makes you a kafir, like that.
Yeah.
That's not serious argument, you know what I mean, like that. So like it needs to be correct in your situation. You have to look at like, what are you debating about specifically, and why would that thing apply in the way that you're saying that it applies. You have to make that case. You can't just say, well, like, here's something that matches, like
Sure.
like lining up keywords or something and just being like, look, there you go, so and so said this word and I'm saying this word, so therefore I'm right.
We've talked about this with Ishmael before. There is this pattern of thinking that ends up taking over when something becomes commonsensical in a certain society, where it starts to pervade everything that happens, kind of thing. Like you end up using the same kind of logic a lot for even just everyday stuff, and it becomes very strange. Like he would tell me about how, like, if you were reading like texts about biology in the Soviet Union or something, they would have sections about angles and stuff before they jump into the more contemporary science kind of thing. And that sort of perfunctoriness, that kind of automatic sort of nods to each other that this is what's going on now, and you're going to have to deal with that or something. The interesting thing about it that is important is that it's very, very easy to mimic, and that becomes like a second problem that people have, where just because like we're generally talking about people that maybe are off the rails a bit, but we think maybe in general are salvageable or something, like could be corrected. But there's also that kind of pattern where a lot of people just quickly mimic the language and the arguments for sinister reasons. Like it's not like
Right.
or for like very mundane, greedy reasons, kind of thing. Like they use it to quickly start to have power within organizations to be able to bully other people, and I mean, I think that's a lot of what's online. I mean, a lot of people, even people that I respect a lot, are just being bullies. Like they're just being bullies to other people in terms of ridiculing their arguments and ridiculing them as people. And I think that, as from the troll perspective or something, that's always been something where it's like, well, once you kind of get involved in that kind of thing, like once you're like, say, a politician or something, like you've crossed over into being like one of the bad people or something, that you're somehow, it's like free, like fair game to attack you or something, kind of thing. But I mean, is that like a mature response too? Is that something that we have to kind of grow out of? Is that something that, like, for me at least, like, do I want to keep making fun of people for having errors in their arguments and stuff like that forever, or do I want to kind of move on from that? So
Yeah. For me, the thing with trolling should be like this pure thing, and people kind of instrumentalize it in this way. And I've never seen it done where it's like, oh yeah, I'm trolling for good. Like people may believe that themselves or whatever, thinking like they're owning some kind of like shit lib or whatever. I've done that kind of stuff in the past, but to me, it was always kind of like, this is an opportunity for a good joke here. It's not so much about like, I'm going to, I'm giving meat to my base of like followers who are going to kind of like lead this charge to change the world or something, which I don't know. I can't like see into people's hearts or whatever and see what's going on there, but there seems to be some element of that going around, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe not even on the people leading it so much as the people who are following, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hard to say, but so I don't know, but that just seems weird. Like, to me, the joking around is just fun, you know. It's fun and games, and that's when fun and games becomes like a sort of veneer for these like ulterior motives and stuff. That's, I don't know, that seems kind of ugly, because then it's sort of like anyone having fun. It's actually, I guess it's sort of like how people they like actually actively want propaganda in their entertainment now. They want like,
Sure,
like really silly cartoon movies or superhero movies to like reflect these different sort of political and social messages and stuff. And I don't think that's great, you know. I know that there's always some element of like cultural production reflects the ideology that it's made in, and blah 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 blah. But like, to just actively want this hollow, empty kind of, like, I want to watch this cartoon and have my beliefs reflected back to me, and I want everyone else to have to hear that message, because I don't know, it seems narcissistic. I guess ultimately, like, all this stuff seems sort of narcissistic, whether it's in that way or whether it's all the history of the world is all like kind of added up and accumulated to kind of prove me right about this sort of thing. I think, like we were talking about the apocalypse sort of stuff briefly, I think that's a narcissistic kind of belief. You know, it's always like in your lifetime that the world's going to end. And I don't know, I think a lot of this stuff kind of shares the same kind of logic of, you know, I've gone through the text and everything, you know, I've understood everything correctly, and everyone is kind of like through history speaking to me and telling me these truths, and it's all adding up to what's happening in my lifetime, and this is all kind of coming to a head now, kind of a thing. And it's, I don't know, it's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, like a lot of the time, I guess it's inevitable, but people very quickly try to spin any sort of conflict into what is the United States' position on it, kind of thing.
Right.
Instead of actually thinking through what the conflict itself is, or like beyond that. And I think that's functional a lot of the time for people in that situation, obviously. Like, I think a lot of times nationalist movements or different things, or leaders, like, they try to cultivate certain types of conflicts so that they can create that sort of thing where it's like polarization, and then one side is basically like survival for the nation by any means necessary, and the other is just this idea of chaos or something like that. So you know, that happens. It's not necessarily just the United States too. I mean, you see that in places like Ukraine or whatever, where Russia becomes sometimes the boogeyman kind of thing, where all problems are caused by Russia or something like that. Like, where, I don't know, it's just it's a natural kind of thing where people the Brunigs talk about this a bit sometimes on their podcast, about like the polarization forcing debates into new territory kind of thing, where people will associate the other side with something that they don't like or something like that, and then start to internalize all these other strange ideas that just because they're not part of the mainstream or the alternative or whatever, you know, like they I don't know. I think you also see that a lot. Like, the most obvious to me is always like the far right kind of stuff, where or some of the far left around like the family and stuff, you know, where, like, you know, the far right will be like trad wife and all that kind of stuff, where it's very obviously like it's not even really what the person themselves wants. It's more just kind of like this idealized version of the family that they're pining for or something like that, and like this, or like the pictures of like a rustic lifestyle or something, but it's just like a certain type of focused lens on a rundown house or something like that kind of thing, like a place they wouldn't want to live really anyways. It's just like it's an ideal thing. And then you get the other side too, I think, where people start to try to think of like, okay, we've thought about the family, now how do we dismantle this completely or something like that. It ends up being like it's like playing around with institutions in your mind kind of thing. It's not really, has nothing to do with like the referent or whatever. So
yeah, the weirdest example I've seen of that recently is like, you know, Biden had these airstrikes in Syria, and people have been posting like these missiles that have like Black Lives Matter and like a trans rights flag or whatever on it. And I don't know if that's a real picture or not, but people are just trying to like make the connection that like those, like the fact that Biden is in some way supporting those types of issues, that has some relation to like military action in the Middle East. Like, you know, like you can't have one without the other. So if you reject like Black Lives Matter, then you're also rejecting war in the Middle East or something like that. And it's just like this bizarre thing where it's like not everything in the world is like glued together like that, you know. It's very strange when people set up an argument between themselves and they kind of have this straw man, or maybe it's not even a straw man, it just is the other side, and it's like their rival, right? So it's like the far left and the far right. You know, you have these debates like about some issue, some atrocity happening in some foreign country, and you're like debating the political, you know, what's the correct position on this? Is this a good or bad thing? Who's the good guys, who's the bad guys and stuff? And what often gets lost in the shuffle is like the people actually involved in that event, you know. So it makes that whole thing about you and your nemesis, and it no longer is like the people who are actually affected don't have a say, they don't have a voice in that, they don't even really matter. What matters is, did you beat your nemesis or did your nemesis beat you, you know? And that just seems, I don't know, that just seems kind of gross to me. So I mean, my I guess my like little ending statement here or whatever would be like, interact with different people and stuff and try, you know, learn stuff, try and figure stuff out. But I think you really have to keep, if you are attracted to some sort of political ideology, you really want to always keep in mind, like, what is it about this ideology that attracts me in the first place, and keep that at the forefront as you're sort of navigating these waters, you know, so that when things come up that seem kind of weird, or you might be not sure if you're on the right side of something or whatever, you can kind of return to those like fundamental values and principles of like, well, I believe in, you know, socialism or whatever, because I believe in like the egalitarian sort of thing there or whatever. And you know, does this debate line up with that? Does either side reflect that, or, you know, whatever it is? I think that's probably the best way to sort of stay on the right path there. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I try to think, okay, well, these are things that I see in other people that I'm worried about. Therefore, how should I, you know, turn that on myself a bit? Like, how do I try to model better behavior for myself, where I'm not doing the kind of things that I get mad at other people for? And then also, not just that, but how do I kind of break out of those cycles kind of thing? Like, how do I not participate in that back and forth even, you know? Like I think it's good to assess and kind of think about, but at the end of the day, you don't want to, you know, like a lot of the jokes I make are just diagonal to these kind of debates kind of thing. Like, they'll be like,
right,
I don't really directly interact, you know, pro or against on something, but I just make fun of the debate in a way. But, you know, at the end of the day, like, what's the step after that? Like, what's next kind of thing. So, yeah, so that's what I'll kind of keep track of, I think. So, yeah.
All right. Should we move on to the questions now?
Sure.
Okay. Either of you guys ever read Mishima or watch the Paul Schrader film? How do you think his attempted coup stacks up against January 6th? I think that's a pretty good analog, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I think, yeah, I guess, I don't know. His was a bit cooler, I think, in theory. I don't know.
Yeah. The thing is, Japan always had, like, anything that we see happen in Japan always has, like, the Japan filter over it, where it's, like, kind of, they just do things, they take everything to the extreme, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
Not to say that that's bad. That can be cool. Like, if you're doing this weird coup for the emperor or something, like, yeah, then you end up cutting yourself open with a sword. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And we both read Sun and Steel, I guess, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, that's the only Mishima I've read.
Mm-hmm. I have some of his other books, but I've not read them yet. But yeah,
I kind of started reading one of his books. I forget what it's called. Something about a sea, something like that. And I do not like his style, his prose style. To me, it was very poorly written, at least in English translation, and I was not interested at all. But his Sun and Steel I really like, or at least I liked when I read it way back. I don't know, maybe I'd still appreciate it, but I thought he was very good at like describing and breaking down his own like interior, like his thought process and his own kind of interior life, and I thought that was really good reading. But the novels, from what I read, not so much.
Have you seen the movie?
Yeah. I thought it was okay.
Is that A Life in Four Chapters? Is that one?
Yeah, with the Philip Glass music and stuff. Yeah, I think that's what they're talking about. Yeah, I thought it was okay. Not really my style of movie. Like, it wasn't really kind of what I would have liked to see. It was a little bit too like theatrical and staged and all that kind of stuff. I understand that's like the point, but it just I don't really like it that much. The music's cool. Yeah. I really like the music.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I don't know. That also reminded me of someone reminded me of there's like a movie about the Japanese Red Army. I want to see that sometime. Oh yeah. I don't know. It's apparently supposed to be very good, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll do a Mishima episode one day.
Have we not? I feel like we did. I remember we did an episode where we put Mishima music on it.
Oh, really?
I remember doing that, so I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe it just came up or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, Donald, why do you hang out with this loser? Who are they talking about?
I don't know. I'm like Jesus. I have to hang out with the lepers and prostitutes and.
Yep, that's me, the leprous prostitute. Do you guys think Palestine will ever be free?
I don't know. Probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or at least part of some sort of federation where it has some autonomy within it or something instead of just being like occupied, whatever. Yeah, I think so. Probably.
I think if the current trajectory plays out, Bollywood will take over the entire world, and all of the world's governments will be like subordinate to the government of Palestine. The Palestinian Authority will just control everything.
Yeah, the Kingdom of Jerusalem will control everything.
That's right. Yeah, that's the New World Order. One world government. Alex Jones warned us. But I think it's a good thing. Okay, how much guilt should we feel in our lives, and is it a waste of time to feel guilty about things which we can't do anything about? Especially with regards to material consumption, it can feel as if you cannot buy things which you enjoy without feeling guilty about it. I'm not religious, so I would love to hear Christian and Muslim perspectives on this.
I don't know. I have had that thing where like I get like an impulse where I do feel like embarrassed and ashamed for buying something for myself or something a lot of the time. Like I get like if I do buy something that's like just frivolous or something, I get like a pang of like I shouldn't have done that or whatever.
I get that out of being really broke. Like when I was really, really hard up for money, spending money on anything except the absolute necessities, I would feel pretty guilty about it. And like talking to my friends about it and stuff, like they kind of have the same thing. I had one friend in Seattle who came from like extreme poverty, and that was like a constant issue with him. Like he got a pretty decent job and started to make money and just couldn't spend money on himself. He would like feel like a ton of guilt about it.
Yeah. I mean, I have had moments where it was like similar like that, but it reminded me of like this time when I was living in Montreal, and I remember like not having really much money for like buying groceries or anything like that at the time. And what I did was I sold some of my old textbooks at like a university bookstore or whatever. Like they had like one of those traveling textbook buyer guys, whatever. And I got like, I don't know, I sold like a pile of them and got like maybe $20 or something like that.
Yeah.
And bought pizza with it. I was like, that was like my sort of coup or whatever, like I got that. And I remember like feeling really weird about that. I don't know. Like that was like a very clear moment of that, of being like, I don't know, or like the feeling of like walking around and everything just being closed, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Anyways, I do think that, yeah, like that might be part of it, but somehow residual or something like that from when I was much younger or something like that. But like, yeah, I don't know. But I don't really. It doesn't. It's funny. It doesn't really register as like a religious or moral thing to me. It's more like just a purely emotional thing.
Yeah, like a psychological thing.
Yeah, it's more like, yeah, like a risk or like feeling ashamed or something like that for like putting my future in jeopardy or something.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, like that somehow it's going to come back to haunt me like karmically or something.
Mm-hmm.
And not like a religious thing where it's like, well, I could use this money to give for like mosquito netting for malaria or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I get the sense this person is sort of thinking about things like sustainability, like
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. I mean, I'll be honest, that is like a important thing in like Sharia, the idea of like having scruples about your consumption, about especially meat obviously is like a big thing, but also like the clothing you wear, your income. That's a whole dimension to zakat. Like zakat literally means it comes from the word tazkiyah, which is purification, and so that is a word that is used in terms of like spiritual purification, but it's also like purifying your wealth. And I've heard a very funny analogy or description of it, that it's the same way in that you have to defecate. You consume good pure food, but you still have some element of that is like waste, and so that's like your zakat. You have to like excrete some of the income that you consume in order to like be pure and healthy. So there is an element of that thinking in Islam, and I think that's really important, but it's so hard to abide by it, by the standards that were set in the early days and everything. It's very difficult to abide by that today. If you think about like, okay, so my food has to be all halal, which means like, not just, doesn't mean that the meat just has a stamp on it or something. It means like you have to go and make sure that the farm that these animals are raised in are taken care of appropriately, and that you're paying a fair price for it and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with like even like vegetables and stuff. Like there's an element of ethics involved in that. Like we do everything nowadays in such an ethically bad way that it's, any kind of form of consumption, it's like, well, there's probably some sort of evil involved in this, which by the standards, like, you shouldn't be consuming it, but like you have to. There's just like at a certain point you kind of have to just accept what it is. So like clothing that's made by like exploited labor, child labor, all that kind of stuff, the energy that we consume, electricity, that's wasteful and polluting, and so that's not a good thing. All this kind of stuff, none of that passes muster by Sharia standards. So the way I kind of look at it is, it's important to be aware of this. It's also important to understand like these are circumstances that God has permitted and created for us. Like we live in these circumstances, and if we're powerless to affect the kind of changes we would need to like correct all these different things, like we should try to work towards that and do the best we can while we're in this situation to minimize unethical consumption and stuff. But at a certain level, there's also like exemptions, like if you can't do something reasonably, then it's not really on you. It's not a rigid standard. You know what I mean? Like those are the standards you aspire to, but if you can't meet them, you just try, and that's what God judges you on. God judges you based on your effort to meet the standards, not by your actual ability to meet those standards necessarily. That's my understanding of it. Now, you can kind of look at that and say like, oh, well, that just means like as long as you come up with a good enough excuse, then you don't have to worry about it. Well, God's probably aware of where your heart is, so it's all about like being sincere in that. So
sure.
All right, I heard from Tom that he might want to get into starting a passive income. Let me say that stock trading can be fun, but if you want something that can be a little bit more fulfilling and probably not haram, try things like owning your own vending machine or gas station vacuum. You'll need to start your own business with a business checking account, get a location before you buy the vacuum or vending machine. Talk to a business owner maybe at an apartment complex or gas station, maybe watch a few YouTube videos, and be ready to restock and collect money from the machine. Well, that's a nice idea. I don't know if I'm going to follow through on that. Maybe I'll look into it. It sounds like, I don't know, maybe not. But yeah, I'll look into that. That seems like something, a potential thing. I just wanted to read this because I thought this was a cool idea that maybe some of the listeners would appreciate, and maybe they can try it out too. So yeah, thanks for the suggestion. I will say, like, if I do get into this and I like the idea of it, I'll let you guys know.
Mm-hmm.
What is Sufism? Is it good? Maybe we should do a whole episode about Sufism, because that's something that people are confused about and I think actively misled about. Just in a nutshell, I'll just kind of briefly summarize it, I guess. It's usually described as Islamic mysticism, but it's not just that. A very important part of it is the social dimension of it. There are fraternal and whatever the female version of fraternal is, organizations, like lodges is how it's usually translated. Tariqas is the Arabic. And for a very long time, you basically, if you were a Muslim, you were also a Sufi. Like, you were in some way connected to a tariqa. Not necessarily, but like 99% of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically how you learned your religion, how you related to your religion in any kind of organized way, was through some sort of Sufi organization. And so the way that a typical lodge would work is there's some guy at some point who is kind of like some sort of mystic, kind of like a genius sort of a guy, who founded a certain way, and people followed him. And he would have a chain of teachers that connected back to the prophet. And in almost all cases, it's kind of interesting, even in the Sunni tradition, it would be through Ali to the prophet. So it would be like prophet to Ali to somebody else to somebody else to somebody else to Imam Junaid or whoever, some guy who would be like the founder of this specific order. And then from there you have like a continuation of certain teachings and practices and understandings of like the Quran and theology and all this kind of stuff. And they're all within the umbrella of Sunnism. I don't know how it works for the Shia exactly, because they have the whole Imam thing, so I'm not sure how Sufism relates to that. I think there are analogs there, but I don't want to like speak out of ignorance. But I would say it's very good, basically. I really like Al-Ghazali. He's one of my kind of like, I don't know, like my references, my main kind of references for Islamic knowledge and stuff. So he was a big proponent of Sufism as a counterbalance to like the legalistic sort of dry tradition. People kind of talk of Islam as having like a dry and there's like this balance that you want to strike. Yeah, spiritual kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's not the be all end all of Islam. Like, and the other thing is people kind of think of Sufism as being detached from like the Sharia, as if there's like there's the legal scholars who are only concerned with like outward like conformity to law and kind of like ritual practice and stuff like that, and they're just like spiritually hollow. And then there's these like Sufi hippies who have abandoned all that and freed themselves, and they're just like basically like this idea of like hippies, like Muslim hippies or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty bad way of understanding it. Sufis were probably more like the more serious a person was about their Sufi practices, the more serious they were about like their adherence to the Sharia. Like essentially to be like a a member of a tariko where you like were living with the people in the lodge and you were going on retreats or anything like that, you had to at the minimum abide by the Sharia in a near perfect way, and then there were usually additional practices and stuff that were involved with whatever specific organization you were in. So it's almost like Sharia plus. It's not
Sure.
It's not without Sharia. It's almost like Sharia at a bare minimum plus other stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I like that is my intuition about it, is that it tends to be received as hippie side of Islam, as if it's like some split off that is emphasizes, I mean, like not that I think that. I'm just saying that like I think that is the popular understanding of it, is that it's kind of like it's similar to Buddhism or something like that kind of thing, and it's just its own Western sort of Buddhism. And so my question though is that I mean we'll get into it I think in an episode, but like my question now is like was there like a reaction against it because of this kind of stuff, like in the more sort of legalistic Islamist kind of stuff? Do they sort of embrace some of the mystical sort of elements, or is it like is that sort of frowned on because it's associated with these kind of other things?
So it's a relatively modern phenomena, like essentially starting with like the Wahhabist movement. But yeah, there is a very strong tension between people who follow Abdul Wahhab. Typically people call them Wahhabis, Salafis, although not all Salafis are like followers of Wahhabis. But they really don't like Sufis. They kind of see it as not so much that they like cause the deterioration of Muslim civilization, but they are emblematic of that like degeneracy. So
Okay.
things like grave worshipping, that is sort of associated with Sufis, and Sufis do participate. It's typically emphasized this idea of like visiting graves, but people who were following Abdul Wahhab saw that as worshipping the graves, and so one of their first things that they got into was I kind of think of it as like drive-by stonings. Like they would show up at graveyards and start pelting people with rocks if they were having some sort of thing around a grave. People would visit like the graves of previous like Sufi people in their order, like people who had died and stuff. And what's crazy about that to me is that is something from the Sunnah that the Prophet specifically advised, is like visit the graveyards. It reminds you of death. Like you should always have, don't forget your mortality. That was a kind of one of his big pieces of advice. So that's where this practice comes from. But yeah, the general kind of like anti-Sufi sentiment comes from this idea that Muslims moved away from the true teachings of Islam, and that they started to kind of mix stuff that was outside of Islam into their, just into the civilization, and that's caused the degeneracy. And the way to get back on top is to purify it and to go back to like the basics, so that's the whole fundamentalist argument.
Sure.
Which I disagree with. I think that's a really corrupt understanding, and for many different reasons. Okay, so yeah, maybe we'll do an episode about that.
Sure.
Next question here says, I might work at the TSA, but I feel like I would just become a disgusting sexual deviant in there. Should I pass this one out and look after something else?
I don't know. I feel like maybe you could become some sort of sexual deviant in this job, and then maybe sell a book about it or something. You could like do it for a year or two, rack up some experiences, and then be like my expose or something like that, and they can make a documentary about you or something.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking, like, if you're concerned about becoming a deviant at working for the TSA, like, I don't know, like, what job is not free from this fear? Like, oh, I'm gonna go be a kindergarten teacher instead, like that. Maybe stick to the TSA if that's your alternative. You know what I mean? Like, there's a
sure.
Seems like that is a problem that will follow you wherever you go. So I don't know, take the job and work on the whole deviant thing.
Well, at the same time, maybe that it'll just make them really good at the job. Like they just get in those crannies and stuff, you know, like just like they're really good at patting people down because they look at like, every part of the body and stuff. And
it kind of is part of the job description. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe they'll like catch a guy with a bomb in his butt or something and become a hero, and then the book will sell better and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I like your optimism.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Tom and Donald. Tom and Donald here. We're sending a message to you, ourselves, from the future. We can't tell you too much because of paradoxes and junk, but this is really important. You have to not do that thing you were planning. You know what we mean. It's going to turn out really badly for everyone, more than you can guess. Please, shelve it. We're begging you. This is our last hope. Signing off. We're out of time. They're coming. So it cuts off there.
I don't know. That's exactly the kind of thing the CIA would tell you to throw you off the, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
The plan. So,
but the way he said paradoxes and junk, that sounds like you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Okay, well.
I don't know about this one. I gotta say though, I'm not sure what they're referring to. Maybe they sent this message too early.
Well, I'll tell you the plan later, and we'll go over it.
Okay. All right. What exactly did Don think the plot of The Idiot was before Tom explained? I suspect the answer is amusing.
Oh, I thought it was like, you know, there's that book, I don't know how you pronounce it, but like Oblomov, whatever.
That sounds familiar, but I'm not really sure.
Oblomov. It's about like some guy that like, anyways, I don't really know much about it anyways, but like, it basically like, a lazy slob kind of thing.
Okay.
So I thought it was like a similar kind of thing of like a book about someone that, yeah, just a lazy slob or something like that. Kind of like a dumb guy or something. I didn't know it. Yeah. So it sounds more like, Being There or something, you know, like
that's a movie, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that's about.
Okay. Well, it sounds more like that or something like that, where it's like a Christ-like figure.
Yeah, definitely. So. Yeah. Afflicted with the same medical problems as the author, right? Epileptic seizures. I think Dostoevsky had that. That's always a cute thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
This Christ-like figure is exactly like me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like Dostoevsky, but that is kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, what are your favorite candy bars?
I like caramel.
Oh, I don't. You're gonna name a bunch of weird Canadian stuff. Okay, what's?
Oh, is that Canadian?
I've never heard of it. I don't know.
Oh, really?
What is that? Caramel coffee? And milk chocolate or something like that? Okay.
It's like milk chocolate with caramel in the middle.
Well, good branding. I nailed that one.
Yeah. And then coffee crisp. Do you have coffee crisp?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess that's a Canadian one too. Stuff like that. I like Aero bars a bit.
Okay, that one sounds familiar. I think that I saw that in Europe.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I've seen that here.
I think that's a Nestle one. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. I can't really have that anymore. Like anything like that just makes me sick. So I get like a headache and just yeah.
Yeah.
Really,
I know what you mean. It kind of grosses me out now if I ever do that.
Yeah. I like saw a big pile of candy the other day, like on like some image online or something, and I was like, oh man, I would have used to love that or something. Or like I saw at the store the other day, maple fudge, like the maple sugar.
Oh yeah,
fudge.
that sounds really good to me.
And I used to get that because in Quebec it's obviously like a very popular thing there, and they used to sell it at like the grocery store. They just have like a little tray, and they'd also have like what was it, like that cheese curds. Yeah.
Oh right.
So,
yeah.
And so it'd be like cheese curds on like one table, and then like maple sugar on the other, and I would get that, and it just, I don't know, it's like anti-food basically. It's like eating something that is just causing you pain.
Yeah.
But at the time I used to love it, and it wouldn't make me sick then, and now when I look at it I just get like a sick feeling. I'm just like, oh man, I would probably die if I ate that. So I don't know. Yeah.
I really like maple like syrup. Like I just like the taste of maple.
Yeah.
So that sounds pretty good to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the benefits of when I lived in Quebec.
Yeah, I can't think of the last time I bought a candy bar. I've never really big into like sweets like that. I've like for desserts and stuff like that. I'm more of like a, I don't know, like cookies and that kind of thing. Candy bars and just candy in general is not my thing, especially anything that's like really artificially flavored. You know, like that actually like grosses me out. So I don't know. In general, like chocolate is kind of a thing I like, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
There's this Finnish chocolate that I used to really like. The company's called Fazer, Fazer. I don't even know if it's Finnish. I think it's a Finnish company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably not even especially good chocolate, but it's just kind of like, you know, good memories associated with it, that kind of like nostalgic thing.
Yeah. I used to get like mini brownies a lot, and also like these white chocolate bars.
Oh, I hate
Just
white
like
chocolate.
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
I would get it on like it was a bad impulse purchase. I would get on the way home. I used to go to school in Toronto, and it would take me like almost 3 hours each direction to get there and back. So on the way home, halfway home, basically, like when I was at the major train station in downtown Toronto, Union Station, they had like right near there, they have like a drugstore, and they would have like all the different candies and all that kind of stuff. So I would go in there and I would see the white chocolate and I'd be like, I shouldn't get it, because I was buying like the big jug of like or like whatever of Coke Zero, you know. So tied me over till I got home, whatever, and then I would see that and I would just be like, oh, and I would just try to convince myself not to get it because it would start to make me sick and stuff, and I'd be like, no, it's time to eat this white chocolate on the way home. I don't know. So,
yeah.
So bad at impulse control, but yeah.
Well, you've gotten better at it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, white chocolate is so gross to me. It just seems like congealed butter, like sweetened butter, basically.
For some reason, my mom can't have chocolate. Like she gets like, she's like allergic to something in the cocoa or whatever.
Yeah. So white chocolate is what she gets.
Yeah. So she gets that, and I have it sometimes. But yeah.
Well, I could see that. Like if you can't have actual chocolate.
Sure.
As one of your consistent listeners, I am holding you accountable for not sending everyone a $2,000 check. I specifically recall you saying you would. Where is my money? Did you tweet something like this, Don?
No. I don't know. I feel like on a long enough time scale, we agree to do this. Like maybe like in 50 years or something. We can like look up who were the original subscribers and send them out $2,000 checks out of our billions.
Yeah, how about this, guys? You subscribe to our Patreon, $5 a month, and we will flip your $5 a month into $2,000 checks. I'm going to buy up all those gas station vending machines and become a vending machine, like build an empire on vending machines. And we'll flip all that money, all those white chocolate bars people are buying, and then I'll spit you guys out a check. How about that?
Sure.
Okay. This is one of our Brazilian fans. Apparently he's a Tom Brazil fan, though. It says, Tom, please move to Brazil and spread Islam here. Muhajir for South America. What's Brazil got for me? What's going on in Brazil that I would like besides an awesome president? What else is going on? You know, I know that graphics cards are very expensive there, so that's about all I know about the quality of life in Brazil.
Yeah,
I know they like steak, which is cool. I like steak too. I know that Saudi sources a lot of halal chicken from Brazilian like factory farms and stuff. I don't know if that's a great thing, but it's of note, I suppose. It's probably hot. That's not something I really like. I don't know. You got to sell me on this. I'm not turning it down, but you gotta
provide some sort of stipend or something.
Yeah.
You know, his living that he's accustomed to now.
Right. Yeah. Now that I'm mining all that cryptocurrency and living on this Patreon millions. I got a certain lifestyle, so.
Sure.
Given the show's 1,000-year quarantine stance, how have you two been able to deal with your life seemingly improving during a time where so many have been dealt a bad hand? Personally, I've had some good things happen since lockdown started and have been able to comfortably work from home, but feel a bit guilty for it all. I'm younger with no spuds walking around, but I can't help but feel like I must be on a different planet than my coworkers juggling kids home from school. Well, I mean, I understand where this person is coming from, but it's nothing to feel guilty about unless you were the guy that ate that bat, then in case you have some things to answer for. But,
sure,
it's way of the road, bud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there is a very kind of strange thing now where it's very uneven, the effect of the economy on people. There's even people that became unemployed. Some of them got more money out of the benefits than they were from working. And
yeah, quite a few people.
Not having to go to work every day and stuff. Maybe probably at a job that wasn't that great a lot of the time. Stuff like that. So, yeah, I think there's also a lot of people that are working from home and saving huge amounts of money on gas and things. Mm-hmm. And very, very uneven. Like there's going to be people that are doing really, really well out of this kind of thing. So millions of people, I mean, at least in the United States, where their finances are a lot better than they used to be. And then there's millions of people that like are just in total shambles. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these things affect people in different ways. It's not like on you to like, you can't sacrifice yourself so someone else would do better. You know what I mean? It's not really how this stuff works. Other things will affect you more in a worse way than it would affect someone else. Like it's just how the world works.
Yep. Why don't we wrap it up there?
Yeah, sounds good. I think we plowed through a good number of questions there. All right. Mm-hmm. So thanks for listening, guys. If you'd like a second episode every week, you can subscribe to our Patreon and you'll get that, as well as access to our Discord where you can chat with us in our lovely community. If you'd like to send in anonymous questions, you can check out the Twitter @YouCan'tWinPod, and there's a Curious Cat link there where you can do so. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next week.